All right, so get ready because we've got some really fascinating stuff to dive into today. You guys send over a ton of articles about Meta, and from all sorts of sources. We got the New York Post, Wikipedia, CBS News, Wired, The Guardian,
Yeah.
even The Verge. So, like, we're talking a whole range of perspectives here, right?
Yeah, definitely a good mix.
Seems like Mark Zuckerberg has some pretty big plans in store for 2025.
Yeah.
And, well, we're going to unpack all of it.
It's a pretty interesting mix for sure. We've got government pressure, some controversial changes to how Meta handles content, and even, get this, a link to the UFC.
Yeah, that UFC connection. I don't know, it really caught my eye too.
Hmm.
But first, I think we got to talk about that interview Zuckerberg did on the Joe Rogan Experience. Remember that one? He kind of dropped a bombshell about the Biden administration and COVID-19 content.
Oh, yeah, he did. Zuckerberg claimed that. Well, he claimed that Meta was pressured by the administration to remove content that was skeptical of the COVID-19 vaccines. And he didn't just say, like, they disagreed or whatever. He described officials, quote, screaming and cursing at Meta executives, demanding they take down posts.
Wow. And it wasn't even just about taking down false information, was it? According to Zuckerberg, they were even pushing to remove posts about potential side effects of the vaccines, even if the information was true.
Yeah, that's right. It really brings to light that tension between government authority and the role of social media in free speech,
Yeah.
especially during a public health crisis, you know? I think it raises the question, where do we draw the line between protecting public health and, allowing open discussion?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, where do you think that line should be? Were you ever concerned about censorship during that time?
It's so complex. I think, honestly, everyone has to grapple with where they personally stand. What's interesting is that this whole controversy, it actually connects directly to Meta's decision to end their third-party fact-checking program.
Oh, right. That program had been in place since, what, 2016? Working with over 100 organizations around the world to try and fight misinformation, right?
Exactly.
And now Zuckerberg's basically saying goodbye to all of them. What's the deal with that?
Well, his stated reason is concerns about impartiality and effectiveness, basically.
So he's saying these fact-checking organizations might not be totally unbiased.
Yeah, and there is some research that kind of plays into that concern, too. Studies have shown that right-leaning media outlets tend to get flagged more often than left-leaning ones by these programs. So it does kind of hint at a potential for bias there.
That's a pretty serious accusation. So if they're ditching these third-party fact-checkers, then who gets to decide what's accurate and what's not?
So Meta's new plan is to move towards a community-driven system, kind of similar to what Twitter is doing, or X, I guess it is now, with community notes.
So instead of relying on these organizations, they're putting the power in the hands of, like, everyday users.
Yeah, basically, users will be able to add notes to posts, providing context, corrections, or whatever additional information they think is needed for potentially misleading content.
So it's like crowdsourced fact-checking.
Exactly.
Zuckerberg's calling this a win for both free speech and accuracy. He argues that by empowering the community, they can ensure diverse viewpoints are represented while also keeping things honest. Do you think that's realistic, though?
It's a bold move, for sure. There are definitely some potential downsides. One concern I have is whether the community can actually be consistent and fair in their moderation, you know? Is there a risk of people flagging content just because they don't like it, even if it's factually accurate?
Yeah, I see what you mean. And how are they going to deal with the sheer volume of content flowing through Meta's platforms? Can a community-driven system really keep up with all of that?
It's a huge undertaking.
It is.
And those are definitely valid questions. I guess we'll have to wait and see how it plays out. But while we're on the topic of big changes at Meta, there's another interesting development. And it comes from a pretty unexpected place, the world of UFC.
Oh, yeah. That's the one I've been wanting to hear about. Dana White, the president of the UFC, joining Meta's board of directors. I mean, that seems kind of out of left field, right?
It does, yeah. On the surface, it seems like a strategic business move. White built the UFC into a global powerhouse. And he's clearly got a talent for building brands and engaging audiences.
So is this Meta trying to tap into the massive sports fan demographic? Are we going to start seeing more live sports integrated into their platforms?
That's definitely a possibility. Imagine watching live UFC fights in the metaverse. This partnership could lead to more live events, exclusive behind-the-scenes content, even interactive experiences that bring you closer to the action.
That's an interesting thought. I can definitely see that appealing to a lot of people. But there's also a political angle to this, isn't there? Whites get close ties to Donald Trump and a lot of influence in conservative circles.
Right, and that connection could be pretty significant for Meta, especially as they navigate, the increasingly complex political landscape. This partnership might help them build bridges with some key stakeholders and potentially smooth things over when it comes to regulatory challenges, too.
So it's not just about bringing in a successful entrepreneur. It's also
Hmm.
about navigating the political arena.
Exactly. This move could have ripple effects that go way beyond just adding sports content to Meta's platforms. It's a decision with a lot of different facets and potentially far-reaching consequences.
It sounds like Zuckerberg's playing the long game here, thinking several steps ahead. But this raises another question for me. How does this partnership with Dana White fit into the bigger picture of Meta's, ongoing rivalry with Apple?
That is a great question, and it leads us to another important development we need to discuss, because while Zuckerberg's busy shaking hands with Dana White, he hasn't stopped taking jabs at his tech rival, Tim Cook and Apple.
Ah, yes. The ongoing saga of Zuckerberg versus Apple. Those two are like the ultimate tech rivals. So what's the latest point of contention?
Well, Zuckerberg's latest criticisms kind of echo a lot of his previous concerns. He's still taking issue with Apple's high transaction fees, saying that they make it harder for developers and ultimately limit user choice. He's also been pretty critical of some of Apple's messaging features, claiming that they hinder the overall user experience.
So this is still tied to that bigger debate about open ecosystems versus closed ecosystems, right?
Exactly. Zuckerberg's a big advocate for open ecosystems, where developers can create and share apps without having to play by one company's rules, so to speak. It's about, fostering innovation and giving users more control over their digital experience. Apple, on the other hand, they have a much more tightly controlled ecosystem. Their argument is that this approach is necessary for security and user privacy.
So it's about finding that balance
Yeah.
between allowing innovation and ensuring a safe and secure environment for users.
Yeah, precisely. And this isn't just some abstract philosophical debate either. It has real tangible impacts on how we use our devices and access information. Think about app stores. If Apple decides they don't like a particular app, they can just remove it. And developers have very limited recourse.
That does raise some concerns about censorship, giving one company too much control.
It's a valid concern for sure. And it's something that regulators around the world are starting to really scrutinize too. There's growing momentum behind initiatives to force companies like Apple to open up their ecosystems, potentially creating a more level playing field.
So are we heading towards a future where we have more freedom to choose apps and services, regardless of what device we use?
It's definitely a possibility. Imagine a world where your phone isn't limited to just one app store, and you can seamlessly download and use any app you want. That's the promise of a truly open ecosystem.
That sounds pretty appealing. But realistically, how likely is it that we'll actually see this kind of shift?
I mean, predicting the future of tech is always a tricky business. But what is certain is that the decisions being made by companies like Meta and Apple, they're going to shape the digital landscape for years to come.
That's a good point. Speaking of shaping the future, let's circle back to Meta's new approach to content moderation. It's a pretty radical shift, right? Moving away from relying on those third-party fact-checking organizations and putting more trust in the community.
Hmm.
What do you think are the potential implications for users like us?
It's a fascinating experiment, that's for sure. The potential outcomes are huge. If this community-driven model actually works, it could lead to a more transparent and accountable system for identifying and addressing misinformation. Imagine seeing a post that seems kind of questionable, and you can actually see context added by other users, helping you evaluate the information for yourself.
That's interesting. It's like having a built-in network of fact-checkers, drawing on the collective knowledge of the community. But what about the potential downsides?
Well, there are definitely some risks to consider. One concern is whether the system will actually reduce bias or if it could potentially amplify existing biases within the community. Another challenge is making sure the system can effectively handle the sheer volume of content on Meta's platforms.
Right. And there's also the question of accuracy. Can we really rely on everyday users to be reliable fact-checkers? I mean, what's to stop someone from adding misleading information or pushing a particular agenda?
Those are all valid concerns, yeah. It's a huge gamble on Meta's part, and only time will tell whether it pays off. But one thing is for sure, this move is going to have a significant impact on how information is shared and consumed on their platforms.
It definitely feels like we're on the verge of a major shift in how we interact with information online, with these changes to content moderation, and the potential for integrating more live events and interactive experiences. It seems like Meta is positioning itself as a direct competitor to platforms like YouTube and even traditional television.
Absolutely. And let's not forget the addition of Dana White to their board. That move suggests that they're serious about tapping into the sports and entertainment markets. This could be a significant challenge to companies like Disney and ESPN, companies that have traditionally dominated those spaces.
It's almost like Meta is trying to create its own self-contained ecosystem where you can find news, entertainment, connect with friends, and even watch live events, all within their platforms.
That's a really good observation. And it's interesting to think about how this strategy aligns with Zuckerberg's vision for the metaverse. He sees the metaverse as this persistent virtual world where people can work, play, and socialize. And it seems like he's building Meta's platforms to be like these key entry points into this emerging digital realm.
So it's almost like they're laying the groundwork for a future where we spend more and more of our time in these virtual spaces.
Exactly. And that raises a whole host of other questions about the future of online interaction, digital identity, and even the nature of reality itself.
Okay, now we're really getting into the deep end here.
Yeah.
But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's take a step back and recap what we've learned so far. We talked about government pressure, controversial content moderation changes, a surprising new board member, and an ongoing battle with Apple. It's a lot to process.
It is. But I think it's helpful to see all these seemingly disparate events as interconnected pieces of a larger puzzle. Meta is clearly trying to position itself as a leader in the next wave of technological innovation. And these moves are all part of that strategy.
So what do you think are the key takeaways for our listener? What should they be paying attention to as this all unfolds?
I think the most important thing is to stay informed and to critically evaluate the information you encounter online. Be aware of the potential biases of different platforms and content moderation systems. And most importantly, don't be afraid to ask questions and challenge the status quo.
It really does feel like we're at a crossroads with all of this. Meta is making some pretty bold moves, and it's tough to say what the long-term consequences will be. But if we had to pick one thing for our listeners to really keep an eye on, what would you say is the most crucial development?
That's a good question. I think it has to be the community-driven content moderation system. Will it actually work? Will it improve accuracy and reduce bias? Or will it just create more chaos and misinformation?
Yeah, that's a great point. It's such a radical departure from how things have been done, and the outcome could really have a ripple effect across all of social media.
Imagine if this model actually succeeds. Other platforms might follow suit, right? It could lead to a fundamental shift in how online content is moderated. But on the other hand, if it fails, it could really erode trust in online information, potentially making the problem of misinformation even
It's
worse.
like we're conducting this massive social experiment, and the stakes are incredibly high.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important for everyone to be aware of these changes and to really think critically about their potential implications. Don't just passively accept the information you're seeing online.
So what can our listeners do to be more proactive and informed?
Well, engage with the new features as they roll out. If you see a post you think needs more context, try adding a community note. See how the system works firsthand. Observe how other people are using it. The more we all actively participate and provide feedback, the better the chances of shaping this into a system that actually benefits users.
That's a great call to action. Don't just be a bystander in all of this. Get involved and make your voice heard. As we wrap up this deep dive, it seems like the key takeaway here is that 2025 is a pivotal year for Meta. We're seeing government pressure, a radical shift in content moderation, unexpected partnerships, and an ongoing battle with Apple. I mean, it's a lot to take in, but it's also incredibly exciting.
I agree. We're witnessing a major tech company at a crossroads. They're grappling with some really complex challenges and trying to chart a new course for themselves. And the decisions they make will impact all of us in some really profound ways.
So as we navigate this ever-changing digital landscape, let's all remember to stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged. The future of online interaction is being shaped right now, and we all have a role to play in shaping it.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible in the digital world.
And thanks for listening, everyone. We'll be back soon with another deep dive into the world of tech, innovation, and all things fascinating.